Hey there, this is RV Bum, and in this video I'm going to go through where to look and the steps on how I replaced them if you find something that looks like this in or around your cargo bay. Let's get started. Welcome back to the channel. This will be a different kind of video due to the fact that I've already completed the repair without doing any videos. I was on a time constraint and really did not know how to do the repair. So I took videos and photos afterwards to help show the steps that I used. I'm also going to use a drawing and parts photo that I downloaded from HWH to give reference to the parts and their location. I have a 2013 Tiffin Phaeton 36GH with the HWH hydraulic slide outs, and these are the nylon glide blocks that are used in them. There are 5 sets of nylon glide blocks for each inner tube assembly. Here's a picture of one of my inner tube assemblies. My coach has 2 inner tube assemblies per slide out for a total of 4. HWH refers as what some people call the diving board as the inner tube, and the housing that it slides in as the outer tube. I will show and explain the nylon glide blocks and their locations by using the downloaded drawing I got from HWH. Okay, here's the drawing that I downloaded from HWH Corporation that shows the inner tube and the outer tube and the nylon glide blocks. This picture here shows if you were sitting inside the cargo bay and you're looking down the inner tube. So this portion right here is the inner tube. This portion right here is the outer tube. Here is one set of glide blocks, another set of glide blocks, and another set of glide blocks. These glide blocks are this kind of wedge shape, and the part number on that is P37185. These glide blocks are on the side of the inner tube, and they look something like this. Got dowel pins that fit into the holes that are drilled into the side of the inner tube. This part number is P14811. And of course, these are the famous ones that break. These are the ones that ride up here, just like this. And the part number on these is P37184. And there's 2 sets of these. This drawing is what you would see if you're standing outside looking up the inner tube assembly. So here's your inner tube, and here's your outer tube. You have glide blocks here, here, and glide blocks here and here. This glide block is this right here, and its part number is P27335, and it fits like this. So this is the way this is sitting. This fits on the outside of the outer tube, and your outer tube is sitting here, and this is what actually the inner tube glides on. It actually goes like this. And you kind of see the shape of it. So the flat sides go against each other. And you have a bolt here that bolts through here and screws into this nylon glide block here. And when you put it together, you have to be careful because you can strip this out. This glide block is the same that was over here. And this is actually the one that mostly breaks, is the lower set that's on the outboard side of your inner and outer tube assembly. And again, the part number on this is P37184. And the way that you get these out, there's screws that come down here. There's 4 bolts. And on my unit, you open up the cargo bay door and you look up and you can see 2 of the bolts. The other 2 bolts are hidden by the framing of the door. So these 2 bolts that are the inboard side you can get with a socket. The other 2 bolts you have to get with a open end wrench. And these bolts will not come out. So what you have to do when you remove these is remove these 2 inboard bolts first, and then start removing these 2. And as you do, put a screwdriver or some kind of a wedge in between here and the metal block and start prying up. Because if you don't, these bolts have to push up the metal block, the nylon glide block, and the inner tube. So if you wedge something in here as you're turning these out, it will make it easier to turn these bolts out. Here are the steps that I used to disconnect and remove the inner tube / diving board. First step was to remove all the stuff that was in the cargo bay below the diving board. Since the slide out had to be moved, the motorhome needs to be level. I parked my motorhome on a concrete pad next to my house. So I used auto level and leveled the motorhome. Next, I extended the slide out almost all the way out. My motorhome slide out drops down the last 2 to 3 inches, so I stopped prior to that. The more the slide out drops down, the more you need to jack up the slide out in order to bring the inner tube past the bottom of the slide out. I used a floor jack, a 4x4 post, and a 2x6 to raise the slide out just high enough to clear the inner tube. Do not raise it any more than you need. 1/4 of an inch clearance is all that is needed. When we jacked up our slide out, we used a floor jack, a 4x4, and a 2x6 to help spread the load on the bottom of the slide out. The 4x4 is plumb, and you want to leave enough room to where you can lift up on the slide but still have room enough to access the hardware for your diving board. Next, start disconnecting the inner tube by removing the 4 bolts that mount the clevis of the hydraulic ram to the inner tube located inside the cargo bay. You have to remove these 4 bolts that mount the clevis to the diving board, and the clevis is attached to the hydraulic cylinder. Then remove the 4 bolts using a 1/2 inch wrench that the end of the inner tube mounts to the slide out wall. To remove the diving board, you have to remove these 4 bolts that are located at your slide out. You may also have to adjust this bracket here in order for the diving board to slide underneath the edge of your slide out here. In order for the diving board here to be removed, it must slide past this. So you may have to you may have to raise this bracket here in order to do that. And to adjust it, it's these 2 nuts here, this one here and that one over there. But before you do anything, mark it. Make a mark here and a mark on that side, the center of your bolt. That way when you loosen it and you put it back to where it was, you know exactly where it was. Or you can measure it, whichever easier for you to do. I just marked it. You could either even put a piece of masking tape here and mark the masking tape if that would be easier. I know I had a hard time finding my pencil mark on it. And I don't know, you might be able to see the pencil mark right there. But once you get those loose, the whole objective of this is to be able to remove this glide block here and the glide block on this other side. These glide blocks are attached to the housing that your diving board fits in. Once this is done, the inner tube will be able to freely move in and out. Where the inner tube goes into the cargo bay, there will be some spray foam insulation. That has to be removed in order to remove the glide blocks and the shims. When sitting in the cargo bay facing out in the inner tube above your head, on the left hand side above the cargo bay door frame is a bolt located right here. You will need to use a 5/16 wrench to remove the bolt. This is the way it looks. Have your bolt. It's got a star washer on it. Here's your frame of your outer tube, and here's the glide block. So you have to remove the bolt, remove the block, and this glide block is in between the inner tube and the outer tube. And to be able to remove this portion, you have to go back outside of the coach and be able to remove this. I had to use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove it and pull it out like that. Then you have these nylon glide blocks, and this is what keeps the diving board centered side to side in the housing. And this one here is held on by these two dowel pins that are up here. These two dowel pins. That's the only thing that's holding that piece in. But you can't push on those to take that glide block out until you remove the glide block that's over here. That glide block there is held into place by one bolt, one tiny bolt. When you remove that bolt, that plastic or nylon block piece there will fall out, but the one that's inside, you'll have to grab that side with a pair of pliers or needle nose or whatever you can to pull that out. When sitting inside the cargo bay, looking out, on the left hand side of your slide out mechanism, you will find a bolt that attaches the nylon glide block to the side of the housing. You have your bolt, your washer, and your nylon glide block, the one that has the dowel pins built in it. You have to remove the bolt, and when you do, the nylon glide block will pull straight out. You have to pull it out. It doesn't slide. It pulls straight out because the dowel pins are in it. When this glide block and block assembly is removed, and there's shims under here, so be careful. Keep track of these shims. You will need to push the diving board or the inner tube all the way over to that side in order for you to remove this glide block that is mounted right here, and it mounts into the side of the outer housing, and you'll be able to see these dowel pins sticking out of the side of the outer housing. Once this inner tube is moved over, go on the inside, push these dowel pins out, and again you will have to remove this glide block from the outside going this way. After you remove the bolt and the nylon glide block on the one side of the diving board, you will need to push the diving board all the way to that side. That will give you enough room to be able to push these pins out to get your other set of nylon glide blocks. Once both of these glide blocks are removed, you can then move to the larger glide block that are attached to the metal block, this here. There are 4 bolts that attach this metal bar where your nylon glide blocks are mounted to. 2 of these bolts you'll be able to get with a 7/16 socket. The other 2 on my motorhome, I had to use a 7/16 open end wrench. The frame for the cargo bay door is located right below the 2 outboard bolts, and the bolts cannot be removed. So in order for you to remove this metal block, you have to raise up between the metal block here and the door frame with either a screwdriver or some kind of a wedge to help assist in lifting this metal bar up as you remove those two bolts. After you remove both nylon glide blocks that are mounted to the housing, then you need to start removing the nylon glide blocks that the bottom of the diving board ride on. And those are mounted with those two bolts there and those two bolts there. You have to remove these 4 bolts. To be able to access and remove the block that mounts the outboard glide blocks. At this point, you will need someone to help you, or some sort of adjustable stand with a roller on the top in order for the inner tube to be removed. The inner tube is very heavy. Here's a drawing of the inner tube and outer tube assemblies. This is your inner tube, or what they call the diving board, and this is the outer tube that the inner tube rides inside of. Here's glide blocks here, glide blocks here, glide blocks here, one on each side, glide blocks that are located here and here, and glide blocks that are located here. These glide blocks and these glide blocks that are up here have shims on them. And the way that you measure the shims is you have to have a feeler gauge and a micrometer. And these are what the shims look like. And they slip over the dowel pins, just like that. So after you have removed and replaced these inboard glide blocks, this one right here, using the supplied screws, you will add Loctite, red Loctite number 271 to the threads on all 4 screws. These ones here and the ones on the inside here do not need Loctite, but these 4 here, the screw that bolts this glide block here needs Loctite, and these 4 screws that attach these glide blocks also need red Loctite number 271 to the threads. Next, install the side glide blocks, part number P14811, without the shims, on the inboard side of the inner tube. So it's this one here, this one on this side, and we're installing them just like that. Use a helper to install the inner tube into the outer tube just far enough to be able to measure the gap between the glide block and the inside of the outer tube with a feeler gauge. So we've got the two glide blocks here and here, and we're pushing the glide block and the inner tube over to one side, and it doesn't matter if it's this side or that side. And then we're taking a feeler gauge and we're measuring the distance between this glide block and the inside of the outer tube. And the distance needs to be between 20 and 40 thousandths of an inch. Once you determine the thickness or the distance that you want to achieve, say you want 30 thousandths, you're splitting the difference, and the distance that you have with your feeler gauge is 60 thousandths. So you're going to take 30,000 in shims to make up that difference. The other thing that you need to do is divide that number, whatever that thickness is. Say it was 30 thousandths, so you need to put 15 thousandths of an inch of shims on one side and 15 thousandths of an inch on shims to the other side. So then it's going to be like that. Pull inner tube back out and install shims and glide blocks, and measure again to see if you have the correct gap. If you do, push the inner tube in to where you can install the outboard side glide blocks, part number P18411, without the shims, and measure them the same way. The way that you measure the inboard glide blocks, you have the glide block here, you have the glide block here. The frame of the outer tube goes here. This goes in between. And again, we're not using any shims. Put this in like this. Take your measurements. Keep this pushed toward the side of the outer tube, and take the inner tube and push it that way against this glide block, and measure the distance between this glide block and the inner tube. And again, you're looking for a distance of 20 to 40 thousandths of an inch. Once you get your distance, this is going to be again on the outside. You have your bolt that goes through here, your outer tube is going to be here. Put your shims and your glide block. That's the way that's going to look. You have your shims and your glide block, and then that's how that's going to look. Pull it back out. Put the shims on the glide blocks. Put the assembly back in and measure it to see if you have the 20 to 40 thousandths of an inch gap. If you do, then pull this assembly back out, or you can pull it out a couple of feet, because now you're going to have to install this glide block assembly here. This one here has two different shims. You have a pretty thick shim, and you have a thin shim. I don't know if you can see the difference between that or not. According to the instructions, you take one of these thick shims and two of the thin shims per side. So you're going to have one thick and two thin on this side, one thick and two thin on this side, and you're going to bolt this in between this middle frame, this middle block, and the frame of your outer tube. So the bolts are going to go through here, going to be up like this. The bolt's going to go through here. You have your metal frame here, or your block, and then the metal frame is going to be here. So this is going to be wedged in between the two. Now the instructions also say that whatever you have left over, you put them below, underneath the bolt heads. Well, I can't get the two inboard bolts out, so there's no way I can put these underneath it. So I'm just setting them aside and keeping them in my parts bin, so I know where they're at and if I need to use them again. Now you are ready to attach the inner tube. Pull the inner tube out till you can install the 4 bolts that attach it to the slide out wall, and install the 4 bolts. Tighten to standard torque values for that size of a bolt. Go inside the cargo bay and attach the clevis to the inner tube with the 4 bolts. Tighten using standard torque values for that size of bolt. Spray the surfaces where the glide blocks glide with a silicone spray. Lower the floor jack and remove the 4x4 and the 2x6 from the slide out. Retract and extend the slide out and watch and listen to any unusual noises. If everything looks good, use spray foam and seal the entrance where you remove the old spray foam. So this project took me 2 days for about 5 to 6 hours. I started back in December after finding a broken glide block in the center of my cargo bay. Thinking it was a set above the cargo bay door, I asked my son Jeremy, who was visiting at the time, for his help. We removed the metal block and was surprised that both glide blocks were still intact. After looking around, Jeremy found the broken set that was attached to the inner tube. Not knowing how to remove the inner tube, I placed a call to HWH. Almost 3 weeks went by with no word from HWH. I decided I need to try and remove the inner tube without their help. So in April, I asked my other son Brandon for his help. We were able to disconnect the inner tube, but still was not able to remove it because the side glide blocks were hitting each other. Brandon, a fabricator by trade, found the small bolt that attached the outboard side glide blocks, and then we were able to figure out how to remove the inner tube. After we completed the project, I found the drawings and the parts picture. Thanks to my sons Jeremy and Brandon for their help, and also my wife, who kept an eye on me when I worked by myself. Kind of a funny story. I was done with the project and putting my tools away in the garage about 8:30 at night. When I went back for another load of tools, there was a raccoon trying to get inside the cargo bay. What's strange is, I live in the middle of the city. I can't imagine what might have happened if I would have been a couple minutes later with me inside the cargo bay coming face to face with a raccoon. Nothing good would have come from that. Congratulations, you just sat through this video. I hope I was able to help someone out there who might have come across this problem. If you have any questions, leave them down below and I will try to answer them. Also, I will leave a link to the parts kit, Loctite, and drawings that I used. Until next time, this is RV Bum saying cheers and happy RVing.